this next section of scripture, when the women go and find the empty tomb, and their actions afterward, who they inform, do they see Jesus? Are they allowed to touch Jesus or not? Is it they, a group of women, or is it just Mary, like in John? Is probably the most difficult portion of scripture to mesh, to sync. It seemingly has the most contradictions, but I think I have it figured out. Matthew 28:1, in the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, early morning, around sunrise of Sunday, first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. Mark, and very early in the morning, the first day of the week, they came to the sepulchre at the rising of the sun. So, again, I think this means around sunrise. They could have started just before sunrise, and by the time they got there, the sun had risen, or it's at sunrise, meaning the sun is in the process of rising. I think it just means around sunrise, not necessarily two different times. Matthew says, as it began to dawn. Mark says, at the rising. I don't think they're two different times. It's at sunrise. They said among themselves, who shall roll away the stone from the door of the sepulchre? When they looked, they saw the stone was rolled away. Entering into the sepulchre, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, clothed in a white long garment, and they were frightened. Afterwards, in verse 9 it says, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 devils, and she went and told them that had been with him, and they mourned and wept. So I'm just skipping the fact that the angel speaks to them, because I want to mention who these women are. It does say in verse 1, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome had bought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him. And then verse 2, in the morning, the first day of the week, they came to the sepulchre. So this is 2 days before, Friday, when they bought all the spices. Now Sunday morning, they, most likely still the same women, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, probably that's the same Mary mentioned in Matthew, the other Mary, so I'll just say Mary the mother of James, and Salome, 3 women now. Luke 24:1 says, now upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came to the sepulchre, bringing the spices which they had prepared, and certain others with them. Who are they? Later in verse 10, it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and other women. At least 4 and 5 for other women. And again, it's upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning. Most likely the same timing. John chapter 20, verse 1. The first day of the week comes Mary Magdalene. That's it. When it was yet dark, to the sepulchre, and sees the stone taken away from the sepulchre. Immediately, verse 2, then she ran and came to Simon Peter. She went back. She didn't stay. Here's the point. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all say that there was more than just Mary. They all mention Mary, but that there was more. Luke says 5, Mark says 3, Matthew says 2, John only says Mary, but they all mention Mary, and they all mention that this first going to the sepulchre is early in the morning, or at least during sunrise. And that's important because a lot of people believe, since John says while it was yet dark, and especially Mark says at the rising of the sun, that therefore they must be 2 different times. I don't think so. Also, later on in the story, which I didn't read, is that as they arrive at the sepulchre, it says, yes, Matthew, they mentioned the angel with a countenance like lightning, his raiment white as snow. But then it says, angel answered and said to the women, "Fear not, for I know that you seek Jesus, which is crucified. He is not here, he's risen. He said, come see the place where the Lord lay." These women haven't run away yet, like it says in John. And that's one reason why they separate these two first arrivals at the tomb. They say Mary came first because she's by herself and she left. Whereas Matthew says that right when they got there, the angel speaks to them. Come take a look at the place where Jesus lay. Behold, he goes before you into Galilee. There you shall see him. I have told you. And they departed quickly. They, all of them, leave with fear and great joy, and did run to bring his disciples word. And as they went to tell his disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, All hail. They came and held him by the feet. So two very important facts. Before they get back to the disciples, this is the first time here in Matthew. They haven't run back yet. The first time they're going to go back to the disciples and tell them, they meet Jesus. They grab him by the feet. They worship him. Yeah, they held him by the feet and worship him. John, however, says this is just Mary. And she immediately runs back. She goes and gets Simon Peter and the other disciple, who is John. They come to the sepulcher. John gets there first, looks inside, no one's there. Peter gets there after, goes inside, no one's there. John goes in with him. Then they both leave. Mary stays outside. But Mary stood outside at the sepulchre weeping, and as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the sepulchre, and sees two angels in white sitting at the feet where the body of Jesus had lain. In Matthew, a group of women is there, and they see the angels sitting, and he speaks to them. John, it's just Mary, and after the disciples leave, she looks in and she sees the angels inside. Then they speak with her, and instead of, "Fear not, I know that you seek Jesus, which is crucified. He is not here. He is risen. As he said, come and see the place where he lay." Nothing like that. Instead, they say to her, "Woman, why weep you?" That's all they say. She says to them, "Because they have taken away my Lord." So there's no information that he is alive. The angels do not tell her he's alive. They just say, "Why are you crying?" She says, "They've taken away the Lord, and I know not where they have lain him." And when she had said thus, she turned and went back, and saw Jesus standing, and knew not it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why weep you? Whom seek you?" She, supposing him to be the gardener, says to him, "Sir, if you have borne him away, tell him where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and says to him, "Rabboni," or Rabboni, which is to say master. So she figures out it's Jesus. And Jesus says to her, "Touch me not. For I am not ascended to my Father, but to my brethren, and say to them, I ascend to my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God." Then Mary leaves, came and told the disciples. So here in John, she arrives, the tomb's open. She goes and gets Peter and John. They come back. Mary comes back as well. The disciples go inside, look, and leave. Mary stays. She sees the angels. She sees Jesus. And Jesus says, "Don't touch me." Whereas in Matthew, this is the first time in Matthew, they go to the tomb, a group of women, and on their way back, they see Jesus and they touch him. Mark and Luke don't have this first interaction with Jesus or the second. They only have this group of women meeting the angels. And then they go back to the disciples. Mark has it like this. They said among themselves, "Who shall roll away the stone from the door of the sepulchre?" And when they looked, they saw that the stone was rolled away, for it was great. and they don't leave. They enter into the sepulchre. They saw a young man sitting on the right side, clothed in a long white garment, and they were frightened. That pretty much matches with John. In John, she sees two. In Mark, she just sees or just mentions one. And this one speaks to her. And he says to them, or them, not just her, "Be not frightened. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, which was crucified." So this matches with Matthew. This angel is not just saying, "Why weep you?" to Mary. Instead, he's saying, Jesus is risen. He is risen. He is not here. Behold the place where they laid him. But go your way, tell his disciples and Peter that he goes before you into Galilee. There shall you see him, as he said to you. And they went and fled from the sepulchre, and they trembled and were amazed. Neither said they anything to any man, for they were afraid. Now, of course, eventually they did tell the disciples, because the angel told them to tell. I think it mentioned that they said nothing to any means along the way. They didn't tell strangers on the street. They didn't just proclaim it to the whole city. They went directly to the disciples, and that's when they spoke. That was another supposed contradiction, that they said nothing, whereas other gospels said they told the disciples. Well, clearly they must have. They were told, and the disciples hear about it. So yes, eventually they do speak. Now when Jesus had risen early the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 devils, and she went and told them that had been with him. So there, eventually she told. Mark just goes into a summary. But still, Matthew and Mark agree. A group of women arrive. And meet angels, or an angel. And the angel says, he's risen. And they leave. Only Matthew has they meet Jesus on the way back before they tell the disciples, but other than that one part, which I can add in, Matthew and Mark are almost exactly alike. Luke is pretty similar to Matthew and Mark. They found the stone rolled away from the sepulchre. And they entered in and found not the body of the Lord Jesus. And it came to pass that as they were much perplexed about this, behold, 2 men stood by them in shining garments. This could be in the sepulchre. It doesn't say they came back out, just that they entered in and 2 men stood by them. That was another supposed contradiction. Are the angels outside or inside? Matthew said it was sitting on the rock, but because I think that happened earlier, when the angel moved the rock, he could have been sitting on the rock, which is what scared away the Roman soldiers. So here it does fit a little bit better with Mark and John, that the angels are in the sepulchre. Standing or sitting, I'll deal with that later. And as they were afraid, and bowed down their faces to the earth, they said to them, "Why seek you the living among the dead? He is not here, he is risen." So Matthew, Mark, and Luke agree. These angels are telling them, he is risen. They're not just asking, "Why are you crying?" like in John. Remember how he spoke to you when he was yet in Galilee, saying the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the 3rd day rise again. And they remembered his words, and returned from the sepulchre, and told these things to the 11. And it mentions who they were. It doesn't mention that they met Jesus along the way back. So the main contradiction, or supposed contradiction, is that there are different amounts of women, supposedly different times. I thought that might be true, and that is actually how Michael Root has it. Different times. That the mention of Mary happened first. She arrived by herself. She sees the tomb open. She goes and gets Peter and John. That's the second time anyone goes to the tomb. Mary, Peter, and John. Peter and John leave. Mary meets Jesus. She goes back and tells everyone, and then the group of women go back with Mary. So this would be Mary's 3rd time going to the tomb. And that's when they all see those angels. Not the angels as mentioned in John, because that was Mary. She looked inside and saw. But now as mentioned in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that the group of women go to the tomb and see the angels. There's a big problem with that, and that problem is Mary already knows that Jesus is not in that tomb, and that the tomb is open, and that Jesus is risen, and she met Jesus. So to have Mary go there, see that the tomb is open, and meet Jesus, and then go back and with a group of women bring the spices and ointments supposedly to be used to properly bury Jesus, and she keeps silent about it and doesn't tell anyone? And the question among themselves, who shall roll away the stone from the door of the sepulchre, as if Mary didn't tell them already that the stone is moved, is just shy of unacceptable. I cannot see that Mary knows all that happened, and she went back, as was told by Jesus, "Go to my brethren, and say to them, I ascend to my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God." Told by Jesus, go tell everyone, and yet she didn't. And they go back to the tomb, and they're still questioning, how are we going to roll back the stone? Now, there is a possibility that in Luke it says, and their words seemed to them as idle tales, and they believed them not. But this is the disciples responding to what all the other women said. You could say this actually happened earlier, when just Mary came back. Mary told everyone, none of them believed her, so she brought the entire group of women, but that is totally out of order. It clearly says these women were telling them all, and that they weren't believed. So I could say Mary wasn't believed when she came back by herself, and this group of women, when they went to the tomb, they're blinded. But I don't think so, because Mary, again, was told by Jesus to tell them, and for the other women to, in her face, say, how are we going to open up the tomb, when Mary said, Jesus is risen, the tomb is open, the stone rolled away, I met angels, I met Jesus, and they're just going to be like, oh, how are we going to open this? Like, right next to her. Totally denying what she just said. I don't believe that happened. I totally don't believe that happened, even though that's how a lot of people have the story go. One of the main reasons why people go with that, and they put the story of Mary first, and then the group with Mary later, is because it says in John, she came to Jesus, and Jesus says, touch me not, I am not yet ascended to my Father. But then the group are able to touch Jesus when they worship at his feet, as recorded in Matthew. They came and held him by the feet and worshipped him. John, he says, you can't touch me. In Matthew, he doesn't say anything about them touching his feet. I think that's the main reason why people put the story of John first, the story of Matthew, along with all the other women going to the tomb, and on their way back meeting Jesus after. That entire chronology, order, whatever you want to say, is based on the one word in John, touch me not. But as you already know, as I've said this before, the Bible that I'm using is the King James Version, easy read. So it's pretty much exactly like the King James Version except for these thous. But the King James Version, and therefore this version, has this word, touch me not. And that is the one word of which this entire chronology must hinge, because they say Jesus couldn't be touched before, he could be touched after. Therefore the story of Mary going to before Jesus, she's by herself, that comes first. Then she comes back later with all them, and they can be touched. That Jesus must have gone to heaven and come back real fast, and now he can be touched. No, I think this is one traveling to the sepulchre by Mary and the entire group of women. It has happened before where a person, a character, was mentioned when there was actually a group. For example, Jesus speaking to the Gadarene demoniac. It says in, I think, Mark that there was just the one Gadarene demoniac, but I think in Matthew that there were two. And I organized it by saying a certain had all these attributes. He was very strong, he was breaking the chains, no one could bind him. And I think that's because he was simply the most notorious. He was the main one that Jesus was interacting with, so it makes sense that he would communicate with that one guy, even though there was actually two. Also, blind Bartimaeus. In between the two Jerichos, the older Jericho and the newer Jericho, it says there were two blind men, and yet this guy, blind Bartimaeus, is the only one named. It makes sense that he would respond and speak to one of them if that guy is more well known and he is acting as the speaker. when they go before Jesus. So I think that is the reason why only Mary was mentioned in John, but there could have actually been more. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all mention this is around sunrise, even though Mark and John are said by some to be different times, that in John it's still dark, so that could have been earlier, and Mark could have been later, which they combined with all the other three to make it later. It's around sunrise. It could have all been the same time, and there could have been more women, not just Mary, even though Mary is the only one mentioned in Matthew. I mean, clearly Matthew and Mark are mentioning the same time, almost word for word with these events, and yet Matthew only mentions Mary and the other Mary, whereas Mark mentions Salome. So Matthew is just wrong. I don't think he's just wrong. I think he just only mentioned those two because they're probably more well known. And Luke mentions Mary, the mother of James, doesn't mention Salome, but other women. Luke doesn't mention who these other women are, probably because they've never been mentioned before. And we already know who Mary Magdalene is. We already know who Mary, the mother of James, is because she was mentioned during the crucifixion. So name the women who you have already mentioned and others which have never been mentioned before. So just other women. I think it's understandable that there is a group of women when only one or two or three among the whole group are named. The entire chronology focuses on this one word, touch me not. Therefore, they put the story with Mary first and the story with the group later. But that word is only translated as touch in a few Bible versions, and this one, the King James Version. Almost all of the other main or well-known Bible versions don't say touch. They say cling or hold. John 20:17. This is Bible Hub, Greek text analysis. It's really out of order in English, but this is how it says to her, Jesus, not me, touch. This is the word touch. It is hapto, or Strong's 680. So take a look at this. 680, root word haptomai, and it could mean touch, or it could mean to fasten, or to lay hold of. That's very important because almost every other version has one of those variations of the word. Jesus said, do not hold on to me. That's the New International Version. New Living Translation, don't cling to me. ESV, English Standard Version, do not cling to me. Berean Study Bible has do not cling to me. The Berean Literal says do not touch me. This literal attempt has touch. King James, the one I'm reading, touch me not. New American Standard Bible, stop clinging to me. Christian Standard Bible, don't cling to me. Contemporary English Bible, don't hold on to me. Good News Translation, do not hold on me. International Standard Version, don't hold on to me. Net Bible, do not touch me. Okay, there's another. So there are a few that have touch me not, but there's plenty that have cling to me or hold on to me. I think cling actually fits a lot better because there is a mention in Matthew that these women are clinging to him, held him by the feet and worshipped him. And I think that this is all one group. When Mary goes, as mentioned in John, it is the entire group. Then she ran and came to Simon Peter, to the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and says, they have taken away the Lord out of the sepulchre, and we know not where they have laid him. We. She is speaking of the group that she's with. Even though the group isn't mentioned in John, it's accidentally mentioned by saying we as a group, not we, myself, and I. We don't know where they laid him. So the first day of the week, Mary came early, when it was yet dark. I'm convinced it's also the other Mary. The mother of James and Salome, and the other women. All of them. They are all going to attempt to properly bury Jesus in the manner of the Jews that Joseph and Nicodemus already had. And they're wondering, they as a group, including Mary, they're wondering how are they going to open up the tomb? How are they going to roll the stone away? which means there's no inference that Mary must be keeping silent, or that she already knows how they're going to get inside, or that the tomb is already open. There's no need to try and read between the lines. It's just the entire group of women are going there. Then they see it open, and then from John, she runs back, or they, but this could be the entire group, came to Simon Peter and the other disciple, and then they both come back. And the group of women are already there, staying there, or the entire group of women come back. I'm not sure exactly. Peter and John look inside, they leave. Then Mary looks inside. But I think that the entire group of women are there. So the entire group of women go inside. They see the angels, and then the entire interaction happens from Matthew, Mark, and Luke of what happens when they see the angels. This is one instance. And I guess Mary just doesn't believe it. She turns herself back and sees Jesus standing. Jesus says to her first, "Woman, why weep you?" And she, supposing to be the gardener, says, "Sir, if you have borne him, tell me where you have laid him." Clearly in John, she's seeing these two angels and is not affected by it. So I think it could be that she sees the angels, and the angels even speak and say he's risen. And she's like, okay, but where's his body? She sees Jesus and responds, "Where is his body?" Jesus finally speaks to her, and I think it makes sense that he would speak to her because she's the only one that is still searching for his body if they're in a group, and the others heard that he's risen, but she still wants to see his body. He would say, "Mary." Then they come out. They all would grab him by the feet and worship him. And he would say, instead of "don't touch me," he said, "don't cling to me, don't hold me, because I'm not going to be here for long." Not that you're not allowed to touch me, but that you're not allowed to keep hold on me because I have more to do. And that's when he sends them all to tell the disciples, "Go into Galilee." And he says from John, "Cling to me not, for I'm not ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren and say to them, I ascend to my Father and your Father, my God and your God." He's not really saying touch me not. He's saying don't hold on to me. Don't keep me from what I'm doing. It might be okay to just leave this as touch me not. I would strongly prefer to change it to cling or hold me not. But because I'd rather have this not be a retranslation, just a reordering, I think I am going to keep it as touch me not. Now, I really tried to figure out how on earth Mary could have gotten there first, and then gone to get Peter and John, and then met Jesus, and wasn't able to touch him, but then came back with a group, and that's when they could touch him. I really tried. Perhaps Mary was on her own to go back to get the disciples, and then the other group of women met the angels and Jesus, but no, that's out of order because he was allowed to be touched later, and it couldn't have been before Mary got back. I think it makes a lot more sense for all the women to be together, wondering how they're going to open the tomb, thinking they're going to prepare Jesus' body properly for burial.